Ted Iverson, Managing Director of the Iverson Consulting Group. Before that, he was at McKinsey and has led transformations across various sectors of manufacturing, particularly focusing on a methodology called Shingo, where he's been for over 30 years, now part of the board of examiners there. Ted, welcome to Titans Up Today.
Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate the chance to be with you.
Absolutely, and I do as well. And I want to start with maybe the most visceral thing that you and I discussed, because I think it's potentially a prototype. You can be a prototype in this case of how people who have experienced challenges in being leaders or standing in roles of responsibility, that really a message that they can grow and expand beyond where they may be. And so that moment that you shared is when, I believe when you were at your first role, aircraft engineering, there was back in that time, I believe it was the 80s.
It was, yeah. Hesitate to say that now, but yeah, mid 80s.
And the company again was?
McDonnell Douglas. So
yes.
Just for perspective, a lot of folks don't know McDonnell Douglas nowadays, but at the time, McDonnell Douglas was not only the dominant commercial aircraft manufacturer, but also the nation's largest defense contractor. So everything from commercial aircraft to military aircraft to missiles and all kinds of systems. Very dominant player in the industry.
Right. And so going back to that in the 80s, the reason why I bring that part up is nowadays, in fact, I just had a management consultant who, leads these type of transformation efforts. And if they're going to give feedback to people, it's scrubbed of a lot of the details just for political sensitivity. And, they want people to get signal and source of, how people perceive their leadership, but they don't want people to know, who and what. But for you, it wasn't the case. So back then, you knew that Jim said this thing about your leadership, or Jenny, or the entirety of the people you were leading at the time. Walk us through that story of how you were operating, what was the experience, and then really how you were able to transform after that and take a more conscious and mindful approach to your leadership.
Yeah, appreciate that, Jacob. It is one of the stories that I share just because it was pivotal in my development. I was a young engineer. I had some production experience behind me before I joined McDonnell Douglas, and had been promoted early in my career and had a pretty good opinion of myself about what I was like as a leader. Several promotions, and so, initially, the general manager at my site came to me and he said, "Hey, there's this new style of business that the Japanese are using to kick our butts in the automotive industry, and I want you to learn it. You're going to help us do it in commercial aircraft." And he sent me out to a couple of places to learn what that was and to see some of those things. And I came back and said, I don't want to do this. It's not going to work. Let's not. And I had my list of reasons why it wouldn't work. Fortunately, Al Egbert was my manager, and he did not listen to me at all. He forced me to learn, forced me to look, and changed the way I saw the world. And part of that was a feedback system that we had in place, so that we talked about specific attributes of leadership and what we wanted to have, these 10 or 12 attributes, and that feedback mechanism was very specific. And so every quarter I would get reviewed by not only all of my direct reports, but all of their direct reports. It wasn't a 360 like we do today, right? Where you pick out your friends and you have them, you do the 360 on me and you send their names in and that little circle. This was everybody. This was 100% completely anonymous, so they could say what they wanted. Everything went to HR, and it had teeth behind it. So if you didn't maintain a certain score on your leadership style and capabilities, and so you're looking at outcomes that you're producing as well as how you're getting it, and if you did not maintain those scores, you didn't maintain your position as a leader in that organization. And we were part of McDonnell Douglas that was trying to turn the tide, to develop some of these new habits and new ways of working. The first one that I went through, HR didn't smooth out the comments at all. It was just, here's the score, here's the comments. And there was a group of people absolutely that loved me. There was a middle group of people thought I was okay. And the hard part was there was a solid group of people that just hated me with a passion. Uh, uh, they didn't appreciate my leadership style. And I could see in the comments, I could see why they felt that way. And as odd as this sounds, a point of vulnerability, I guess, I cried my way through the first one. It just hurt so bad to think that I was affecting people that way. And yet, without that stark feedback in place, I think I could have continued to deceive myself about what kind of leader I was. I think without that feedback mechanism in place, I would have been able to justify my actions and my behaviors because I was getting results. I just wasn't getting it in a way that was, long term sustainable, um, really engaging talent that was responsible, in my areas.
So if you look at the spectrum of responses, and for the sake of allowing others to grow who are listening to this, vulnerability is key. And you already have been vulnerable, and that's why this story is so powerful and great. Is, you know, are there particular examples where if you look at that spectrum of responses, some of the negatives, were there examples that you recall, maybe specific things that were said, or even events, relationship with those people, and how you, once you became aware of it, you were able to heal those or transform them into getting even better results in the business?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of it had to do, I think, I was raised as the son of an entrepreneur, and dad was very direct in his leadership style, and I grew up working with him in certain areas, and so you know you kind of adopt what you see in some of those scenarios. Um, and so being very directive, being very explicit, um, caring less about why and more about the outcomes, and kind of being focused that way. Um, in those days, I didn't care at all about the why. If I was engaging hearts and minds, it did not matter to me. I'm more concerned with, did you do your work? Did you do it in an excellent way? And if you didn't, that's an issue, right? And you're responsible for that. So you can look at it and justify it as, I treat people like adults. Right, we do. We treat people like adults, and I'm not advocating any of that, but it's more like, um, equal adults. I do my job, you do your job. How do we work together and collaborate and cooperate on those things? Um, I don't recall any more specifics beyond that, other than I know I was very directive and not very kind. I honestly didn't care if people liked me or not in those
Hmm.
days. Just do your job. That's what you're getting paid for.
And what changed after that? How did you go about
The,
turning
the,
it into the proper
yeah,
rhythm?
the way that it changed is, as we started engaging more people in the continuous improvement efforts, more ideas coming, is where I had to learn not to judge. I had to be able to learn not to judge the ideas, but to help them with the process of looking at those ideas and learning, problem solving methodology, finding root causes, all of those kinds of things. Um, and understanding that within my framework, I had ways of approaching work and problem solving that had helped me to be successful. But I need to share some of those things with others so that they could do that same thing for themselves. So it's more, as a leader, more about me coaching through that process and knowing that they are investigating root cause as effectively as I would do if I was in their role. Basically, if they know what I know, and they think, the goal is to get them to act as entrepreneurial as you would be if you were in that position, and even more so sometimes because they bring talent in areas that you don't have. Um, Hope that
And how
makes sense.
easy was that?
Not easy. No, it took repetitive. The first review that I, you know, cried my way through. there were still highs and lows. After that, there were times, I created some of my own problems. When we started changing the way we did business, we asked for volunteers to come out of some of the fabrication areas, form this new work cell. We got people who wanted to be there, and those folks were um, confident about their work, willing to try something new. Great employees, and the first couple of work cells where we put fabrication right next to assembly, and they manufactured all the parts they needed on a pull system. Everything was working amazingly well, tremendous results. We thought, God, that worked so well, let's do it again. So we developed another work cell, and then another one, and it all worked beautifully until all that was left in our fabrication area were a group of people who didn't feel comfortable with their jobs, who didn't want to volunteer for any of the previous opportunities. Um, People who struggled with, being to work, and I had put now all of these low performers into a single group, which um, fed on itself with poor morale. And it's like, oh my gosh, I did this. I took out all the good influencers and put them in these others, and now I've got this group, and it was a pain to manage, and a pain to, eventually I had to disperse those folks, performance manage some of those, but then disperse the rest so that they could have the positive influence around them that they needed to be more effective in their work. And people are all at different scales, and depending on where they're at in their lives, sometimes you're going through struggles, and having positive people around you in your work environment makes life better. So learn some hard lessons there about how to structure that talent as you go through, and not create problems, in that process.
So walk through some more of the building blocks specifically that you mentioned a few, and it was engineering centric in the way that you communicated it. And there were some cultural elements there. But if you were to say, here is somebody who's at a low, that's listening to this, they've gotten negative feedback, they've failed, people left the business, and maybe they were tolerating things that just weren't ever going to get them to that next stage. How did you go from, you were achieving success, you were getting results, you were getting the promotions, but you, within that, you found a low that was really a bifurcation of the path. You could have said, I'm right and everyone else is wrong, and who knows where you would have gone.
Yeah.
But instead you took the other path and said, how can I approach this with a way, or what was the question that you asked yourself? How, like, what really were the building blocks from a cultural standpoint, from a, these are the people that I need to bring up, and this is how I'm going to do it. And like you said, hey, some people did have to leave. Maybe they weren't, the best fit for the company. It happens. But really walk through a practical set of building blocks if someone were going through that experience in their life right now, and how they could chart their path forward.
Yeah. So having that feedback loop in place was, the first block. I gotta have a feedback loop. And so however you get that, however the real feedback is, one of the things I help leaders with right now is just making sure that we've got some mechanism where you get unfiltered, real feedback. And in all honesty, we think about people working for us. The reality is, I provide leadership services, and those people are my clients, right? So I'm basically doing a customer survey to see if they are favorably being impacted by the leadership services that I provide. Um, and that means sometimes making the tough decisions that aren't popular, but you get even more unpopular if you don't make those decisions. Um, but the other part of that is recognizing that we all have certain behavioral traits that, we're used to moving in certain ways, and getting out of those patterns is sometimes very challenging. And so early in my career, having the metric in place is great, but you've got to. And one of the things I really appreciate about the Shingo Institute and the Shingo Prize is that they teach us that if I'm going to have ideal results, the results that are very impactful and also sustainable over time, if I'm going to have those ideal results, I've got to have ideal behaviors. And so it's focusing on those leadership behaviors, and leader standard work is the tool that I've used the most over my career to be able to help me, pick out those things that I need to do better, that I need to work on. And it's almost like carrying your golf scorecard, you know, am I good at these kinds of things, and not so good at those kinds of things. And if I get the feedback that, something I was good at, I've kind of dropped off in, I build that back into my leader standard work. So, workouts, same way. I'm looking at, what my performance is, where my maxes are at, where I want to develop more. This is basically just a workout list. And I do mine on a monthly basis. So every month, I map out, this is what my ideal month would look like, the things that I want to do on a daily basis, weekly basis, and then I actually have monthly, quarterly, and annual that reflects on that, but I refresh it, every month. And in a business setting, then I would review that with my immediate supervisor, and we'd look at it. And that would allow them to give me some coaching on, here's what I've seen you do, here's what I think you can do better. And with my subordinates as well, I have them do leader standard work, and we talk about that on a monthly basis. And I even then turn mine around to them. Once we see what they're doing, then as their leader, I say, well, here are the things I'm doing, and these specific ones I'm doing for you. These are the things I'm doing to help you be successful. Tell me what I can do better to help you be successful in your responsibility. So that to me has been one of the key tools and systems that I've used to help me change, from the way I would be naturally to the way that I hope to be.
And do you have that sheet with you at the moment? I remember when we first had our call, you had the sheet right there.
I'm rewriting them right now, but the one is under revision. But they basically look like this. They are. I mean, I've got my stack of one every month, and they're. When you're inside of an organization working as a leader, then it's a little bit different. Mine right now reflects my work as a consultant and the leader of the organization, but it's got family stuff mixed in there too. So it's a checklist of those kinds of things that you do on a regular basis. When I do it, it gets an X. When I don't do it, it gets an O. I categorize those in my leader standard work. I have 4 categories. They're intellectual, physical, spiritual, and social. And so these activities are linked to those categories specifically. So in a business, and when I did this, in a manufacturing type setting, I would have activities linked to safety, quality, cost, those leadership kinds of things, socialization, those activities. So I know that if I'm good at these behaviors, I can then compare that with the KPIs for those elements and say, are my behaviors generating the outcomes that I want? Or do I need to change my behaviors so that I'm better able to influence the safety in our organization, the level of productivity gains, any of those categories? You can link those two, and then how to calibrate it. So.
Right. And the way I see it is, we talked about how back in the 80s, the world was different. And let's focus on the way I picture it is nowadays, it seems that we're in much more of a sugar environment versus back then it was much more of a water environment, not even vegetables. It was actually water almost, where, in today's world, we've said this for over a decade now, ever since, even maybe 2 decades, that we don't know the effect of the devices, the ways of working, many of which have even changed over the last few years, where we're constantly digitally stimulated, where if I don't like something that you say, or if I don't agree with you, I can just turn off the Zoom, and we're 600, 1,000, whatever, an arbitrary number of miles away, and I don't even have to think about you. We don't go to the same office. You don't have to call me. I don't have to call you, but of course we can reach each other at any time. It's a very sugary environment. That what that creates is, without the framework that you're laying out, everything is qualitative, everything is subjective, and everybody has their own opinion, and they can absolutely be right because there's no face-to-face let's just talk and work through it and see where is the best path forward for the organization. And so, back then, the water contrast of that is I'm right in front of you. We're working in a physical environment, which was in the engineering and manufacturing space, which you were. And if you didn't do things right, there were legitimate risks and consequences, even down to somebody could lose their life in that type of environment if things were not run properly. And so, to ask on behalf of myself and our audience, are those some lists? Maybe it's a lead magnet for you that you can share with us that we could access, or some templates, because I think that would be transformational, having the proper feedback loop, and also really just that ability to quantify and turn things from this is how I feel into here's what we're going to do, here's how we can be better as an organization or individually, like you're saying.
Yeah. So resources, things to look at, right? Things to quantify. The guy that I've followed on this, and he's passed away now, but David Mann, I wonder if I've got his, hope this is okay if I do this. I've got his book right here. There it is. He's the father of leader standard work, David Mann, 3rd edition. The pattern that I follow is based on the things that he taught with the things that I've learned on how to apply it. And building that culture where, it's not so much whether we're remote. I mean, I deal with remote stuff too. I've spent a ton of time in mining. It's weird, right? I know one topic, I know operational excellence, but I know it across a lot of different industries. So think about those, but I also have insurance clients. I have insurance clients who don't even go to the office anymore, ever, right? And so you still have to assess, because they're all working from their homes and things travel around, whether it's claims, whether it's, any of the work that they're doing with new sales opportunities and looking at those things, service centers. And so even though we are virtual and we are separate, that connection with, guys, here's the business KPIs, this is what's happening, right? And we all love working from home, but if I'm not getting the outcomes that the business needs, this is not a sustainable system, right? And so especially in those environments, I'm linking that with behaviors to make sure that we're getting those outcomes. And the behaviors are sustainable too. And the one piece we haven't talked about, I mean, all of this is great, operational excellence, and you can motivate people with that operational excellence thing, but it took almost a decade before we learned that there is a major piece that answers the why for people. Why should I care? Why should I be involved? Why is this important? And that is that connection to meaningful purpose. And if I can't answer that, a lot of the toolsy kinds of stuff is really hard to sell.
And we're going to get right into that. The reason that I asked that, though, is because, and to expand on it, is that what you're bringing forward, in my perspective, is the antidote to this avoidance opportunity, the escapism opportunity that these digital devices do give us. If you do not like even the way that you feel, we mentioned kind of the cultural sense or communal working within your teams, but if you don't like the way you feel, here you go. You have a device which will take you to anywhere mentally that you can escape any pain, any uncertainty. But I think that having that framework, quantification, feedback, leader standard work, a sense of responsibility that's shared, that's really the antidote to, I would even say that, and I think this is probably proven if we look at the data, is that all this happiness, all this sugar in our minds is doing much more harm to us than good. And we need to embrace things that are uncomfortable, things that are painful, and facing the true reality. Here are the numbers, here are the KPIs. And if we want to grow, like you said, that sustainability and the longevity of an organization, you have to embrace that leader standard work. So before we get into the purpose element, because I think that's deeply important, and you mentioned that was part of your transformation, talk more about this leader standard work and how to create the shared sense of accountability and responsibility in today's world.
Yeah, those are really what we're talking about, are agreed upon sets of behavior. How will we interact with each other? And there are times when leaders today are hesitant to really call people out. You can,
Yes.
sometimes you get bad actors in the group, and they throw a tantrum or they do this or that, and the leader, doesn't really have, um, I don't know, the security or the strength to be able to say in the environments where we're talking about, where these companies are doing, and that's, you know, I'm I don't want it to sound like I'm talking about theory. I'm not. I'm talking about the way that some of the great organizations are running globally. Um, the standards of behavior are well defined, and if you step out those standards of behavior, you will get called on it. It will be indicated, and there are not only leader standard work as a tool for that, but people doing process and role confirmations on some of those meetings and interviews and coaching sessions and that. And if you're uh, not part of that, uh, agreed upon set of behaviors, um, it becomes it becomes a point of discussion and coaching, and we want to coach people into those behaviors. But there are people who exit themselves out of these organizations because they don't. It doesn't fit. They don't want to be nurturing. They don't want to, help folks move to that next level. And while
Yeah.
it's a small percentage, it's still like it was for me. It's a significant shift in how you think about what you do as a leader.
So powerful. And if we look at the literal definitions of organization or corporation, start with organization, having that defined set of behaviors is what organization is. There, if you're organized in life, or if you're an organization, it is by definition a set of principles, standards, and just ways of existing. And then if you look at the term corporation, it means body. And if there's a sickness in your body, if there's something that is you got gangrene on your foot, you're going to have to cut it off. As painful as that is, you're going to have to. And I think that, yeah, we're enabled, or the opportunity is there, I will say, to try to avoid those things, but that's unsustainable, as you say, right?
Yeah, yeah. Real life example of that, real quick. A great example from the mid '90s. If you know anything about the Saturn Corporation, right? General Motors did a study in the '80s and, well, late '70s, early '80s. Same scenario, right? They knew we're not going to survive if we don't do things different. Sent a bunch of people out, 100 folks globally, best practices, came back, did the study, and Saturn was actually GM's answer for how we need to do business in the future. Their site was in Spring Hill, Tennessee, 5,500 people working there. Um, when I was there and had the opportunity to spend time, it was incredible. The level of proficiency every 20 minutes, material moving, on that cadence. That was their tag time from outside um, suppliers coming in. I mean, the engagement and enthusiasm and performance was off the charts. Now, Saturn's design was never a great, design aspect, but their manufacturing was extremely powerful. Um, and they called it, right. They had their behaviors defined and everything, and they called it Saturn-like behavior. And
Mm.
so, if you acted outside of the parameters of what was defined as Saturn-like behavior, uh, that was a point of discussion, and you wouldn't be outside those parameters very frequently without having some implication, to the point where, and they used the thing that was really cool, right? This is not like a non-union site. They used UAW experienced people when they put that plant together. So you had pre-existing patterns of behavior, and inside of Saturn, something I've never seen previous to that and rarely seen since. They did paired leadership, and so over every business function, every part of it, there was the GM Saturn manager leader, and there was the union leader, and they basically divided. I run the business, you run the people. Union took responsibility for running the people, so union would actually point out to folks, this isn't happening, this needs to be better. and they took that responsibility for making sure the best talent was on the team and performing the way that it needed to be.
Was that a U.S.
Yeah.
Originally a United States-based organization, or was that a foreign, group?
No, it was all U.S. based.
Hmm.
The guys were just phenomenal. I could talk for a long time about that experience. Spent so much time there. I actually snuck away from the group I was supposed to be with. I went in the regular lunchroom, spent time talking to just the production guys, and the production guys were so clear about the priorities, the initiatives, the level of engagement in their work. That I mean, they sound like senior vice presidents who were just production workers, and I thought, I am so glad I'm not competing with these guys, because they were just powerfully aligned and engaged, and it was very cool. The plan for GM was that they'd create this microcosm of Saturn, and then that they would rotate all of the GM leaders through Saturn, give them the Saturn experience, and that all of General Motors would then become like Saturn. So they had the very successful years that they had that, and they started rotating people through. And what actually happened was the reverse. What actually happened is they contaminated the sample, they contaminated the pilot. GM leaders went in and said, that's not how we do business at General Motors, and they started changing it back. So when the financial crisis came of 2006, 2008, Saturn was no longer performing the way they needed to, and it closed, right? And another story in GM's, have several of those instances where they had so much opportunity to be just absolutely amazing and had achieved great things, but were not able to sustain it.
Is there something that would have saved them in the sense of quicker feedback loops on the reality of, let's say you could measure everything down in a production environment, and you have the standard or the Saturn standard. You can see how things are operating, and as soon as that starts to be contaminated, production numbers go down, engagement slips. Is it something that can be saved by that rapid feedback and change, or in that case, was it the outside was too heavy and they lost connection to those numbers, or
Yeah.
how could that potentially have gone differently?
From my perspective, um, uh, and we saw some of the same stuff at McDonnell Douglas, right? Where leadership and their ability, in fact, I gave one of my large clients, large mining client, their center back, a talk to last week, and we talked about dinosaurs and golden parachutes. And when you look at large, powerful organizations, everybody thinks that they'll, this organization will live forever. It'll, we've been so powerful in the past. They don't recognize changing conditions. And for a lot of those leaders who've come up through the organization, their programs are set, their incentives are set. I'm not going to risk any major changes. And the system really does not support high levels of change inside of leadership. And so transferring GM leaders from other sites into Saturn without changing some of those other systems at that level probably contributed. The fact that they could get away with their old behaviors, even in this new environment, that was a problem. And so at the corporate level, we didn't have that sustaining mechanism there.
So how would you distill then the magic of that Saturn environment? Because you mentioned they had their priorities very clearly set, the initiatives, they were powerfully aligned. What made that special in that group?
I think, and we'll talk about this as we go, they had purpose, right? They were the future of GM, and they knew it. They knew that all of GM was depending on them to be excellent. Um, um, there was some isolation and autonomy in that they could be measured as a separate business unit, so we could see their impact and their results, right? So you could directly connect, like we talked about before in the leader standard work. You could see these behaviors, and as a leadership team, if I'm good at these behaviors, I'm going to get these results. So you could see that stimulus and response in the organization, um, and they just were very clear about what are those behaviors, right? What is Saturn-like behavior? And I love the partnership between the union and management. It is still a pattern that I use when I'm dealing in those organizations that have I've got one client that's got 11 unions inside of a very small organization, and getting that partnership going, being very transparent about what is acceptable on both sides, and what our real concerns are, creating that collaboration, that's huge. Um, so I don't know, those are some of the keys I think that need to be there, and then we hold
Right.
ourselves accountable. So,
And I definitely want to go deeper on purpose. I am, some words come to mind that I've heard from individuals is things like process doesn't matter. Things like purpose doesn't matter. I've heard these things in present day environments. And even so, to go on the purpose thing, a lot of people think like, well, purpose, everybody talks about purpose. What about work? Why don't we just do work? And maybe that's sort of some of that mindset you talked about before. Actually, an interim question here. Did you ever take a Myers-Briggs personality test?
yeah, yeah.
What are you?
In my career. Um, the IN, is it INTJ?
Okay. Yeah. I figured as much.
That was the first early in my career, right? But I noticed over my career and during the McKinsey time, the last time I took it, I was an IN. I don't remember if it's FJ, but the feeling part, I thought there's no way I'll change. I've always been one of those freaking let's get it done kind of.
Yeah.
And the feeling part, I don't, you could say it's because I'm getting older and I've seen, I'm a little mellower now, but I think I've learned the power of having hearts and minds, and there are some pieces that you can use to get hearts and minds into that. And the purpose stuff, honestly, it's been corrupted. Um, it's hard to talk about it because a lot of people haven't done it well.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Or there's also the other thing that I see is people hear about purpose and they say, well, everybody talks about purpose. It's so overdone. Nobody wants to hear you talk about purpose. It's like it's done because it's essential. And if we don't have a uniting purpose, why are we even here? It's not going to really drive the best out of you if you do not have a purpose behind what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And it's the thing that I guess has hurt a little bit, and a lot of the large consulting agencies have taken advantage of this. They use purpose for doing a lot of the ESG kinds of things in order
Yeah.
external facing, the environmental social governance kinds of things. It's external facing, and so it's almost like marketing and advertising. And we rarely, inside of those organizations, they just don't connect it to the way they really work. And so it becomes a differentiator. And yeah, we say that, but we actually act like this, right? And that dissonance then causes friction in the organization, and people start letting go. And then investors are looking at it and they're going, you guys don't act like that. Look at what's happening at these sites. And you've been, you've got fines from OSHA and, EPA and everything else. And, if you're really living those statements on purpose, then you wouldn't be. When I talk about purpose, it's inside. It's how we reflect it operationally, and it's not so much, I mean, I had one organization, steel fabrication and steel manufacturing, 53 sites globally, and when we went in first to look at what they were doing, their purpose was we create shareholder value, right? Oh, that's what we do. It's on the walls. It was ever we create shareholder value. I said, I looked at 5 or 6 of their operations and a couple in Europe, and I said, I don't believe that. I don't believe that you're really most interested in shareholder value. Like, well, why would you say that? You're doing manufacturing in California. That's not financially effective. It's hard to do manufacturing in California. It's difficult. It's hard to do it in the United States. Why haven't you taken that offshore? And they're like, well, we have tremendous talent. We have great people. We have the need to be by customers. And those are where some of our customers are. And we value that connection. And we started talking about things, and I'm like, that's the purpose you're living right there. Connection to customers, connection to value, connection to talent. And I said, it may all result in shareholder value, But if shareholder value is your primary focus, you wouldn't be doing some of these other things. So it's more of a long term, not a short term view. And they were like, "You're right. That is what we do." And the other, I guess, the other way, if your purpose isn't something that makes you proud, I mean, sometimes I won't even ask, "What's the purpose of the organization?" I'll ask, "Tell me about a time when you felt really proud to work here." And whether you're frontline, first level supervisor, mid level, or top, when did you feel proud to work here? And you get moments like at one of the insurance companies where I was working, the lady said, "Oh, I have one." One of the senior executives there. She said, "I had a cab driver that was bringing me back to corporate headquarters from the airport, and as we pull up in the front, the uh, the cab driver said, 'Do you work here?'" This was in Chicago, and she said, "Yeah, I work here." And he said, "I've always wanted to meet somebody who worked here, because I lived in St. Louis when the last big hurricane came through and wiped out huge communities." And he said, "Your company is the one that came in and helped us rebuild, that put our community back together." He said, "The other guys didn't stay. Your people stayed. Your people helped us." And she was like, "That's what we do. That's our purpose." That's,
Mhm.
that moment, that resonance. And then, so all of the systems we talk about, all of the, all of the leader standard work, the behaviors, all of that, it's asking, how do I get that purpose and that feeling to become the systemic way that we behave as an organization, so that those moments are not accidental or unintentional, but we're actually using systems and approaches in business to create those things systemically, repeatably, over and over again. People have that feeling, right, for being in the business.
Yes, and the analogy that comes up in my mind is, imagine you have the ocean. We're all a molecule, we're a part of that ocean. And great organizations eventually become the shore, the rock that water runs up against. They come together, they form and they solidify and say, here's how we do things. This is the process. This is what matters. And by doing so, they become, the bedrock. They become something strong and that, has a real definition to it versus organizations that say process doesn't matter. We just need to go and talk to more customers and try harder. And, we just have to be like everybody else. We just have to flow. If I'm not a water molecule anymore, then I'm different than everybody else, and that's a risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the analogy that comes up, and really, actions that are compelled versus actions that are controlled. When you're aligned and you're operating deeply from purpose, you feel compelled to do the right things, to make the right decisions, and to contribute to those around you. Versus if you're controlled, it's like, yeah, I have to hit my 100 actions today, or else I'm not going to get what I want. It's so fickle. It's just like that water molecule flowing around in the ocean.
Yeah. And one of those produces anxiety and the other one produces inspiration, right? I like the analogy that's used with the rocks, because when we get one organization that's doing really well and represents that nice solid foundation, what happens is they start sharing ideas with others, and then all of a sudden, geographically, we find these hubs of excellence where crazy things, amazing things are happening because they're sharing, and you start to develop this grouping, right? There's one in Ireland, there's one forming now in Chile, there's one in northern Utah, there's a group that's starting in Europe. um, these are cool areas where because one organization has set out, its standards, others are able to replicate that and make it theirs.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a book that I read. Um, it's by one of the big sales authors. I can't remember it at the moment, but essentially it starts out by saying what really differentiates great salespeople. We're going to speak about process, and we'll talk about purpose then as well with it. But they did a survey, thousands of salespeople, and the true top performers had they had the belief, and the externalization in the way they acted was in that my process is what makes me great. Ones that had ups and downs were sometimes great, but had their off times, or ones that just didn't succeed and perform, believed that it was their charisma, believed that it was the the circumstances. Maybe it was the economy. Maybe it was, the luck. It's the prospect. But in reality, it was, it's the process. It is, as you have to expand from process, because that can be so cognitive, it is the definition of these are the standards. This is how we do it. This is the way we approach it. And for a leader, you mentioned that oftentimes leaders that do struggle with this just don't have that sense of security or really the bravery to define those things. They want everybody to come in and be an individual because everybody loves being an individual, right? But, in a true organization that wants to perform and succeed, having structure and definition of behaviors does not prevent or limit or remove individuality.
Right.
Properly done. So how can that be balanced? Talk about that. How can you balance the right structure with individuality and people feeling that they can contribute and be their true, greatest self within that organization?
Yeah. The coolest part about that is that we're not asking people to all be robots, right? And do it this way in a very prescriptive kind of way. What we're doing is asking them to identify what's the best way to do this in this role, in this leadership position. If my month was absolutely perfect, what would my month look like? And then we strive for that. But that's not a lock-in. That's the best way I know how to do it right now. Because the moment that me or any of my peers that same kind of role has a discovery, has a great thing happen, we need to be able to share that with each other and say, I shifted to this, I did these things, here's the impact that it generated. Wow, we should all be, and then updating our standard to that new, here's this new level of behavior. An example of that, one of my CEOs was out doing, a Gemba walk. Nothing too fancy about the Gemba walk, right? He was very respectful. And from my viewpoint, when I have leaders going out, I want them to be able to understand what is the truth, how well are things working here, not to tell, but more to ask and listen, right? Very, very respectful. As Dr. Shingo says, big eyes to see and big ears to hear, but small mouth. Don't speak a lot. So he was very respectful. This one mining CEO, very respectful, very great, talking to a digger operator, and he did all of that great. And then right at the end, he said to that individual, I hope you know how important your job is, because when you do your work in this way, it contributes to our production this way. And he explained it all, that connection. And so here you've got the CEO to an organization and the digger operator. The CEO is the most important person in his life professionally. There is nobody greater than the CEO in that individual's professional life. And that person is telling him how important he is to their success and to achieving that purpose. Their organization is set up to build a better world. And he connected that to the better community, better, the moment there was so powerful. And so new best practice, right, for leaders and their standard work. When you get done doing an observation, please make sure you connect that person. Be prepared in advance. Connect that person to purpose. Help them understand how their job connects, not just at the top, but each of those layers. So anyway, maybe that's too detailed, but
no, that was fantastic.
It was powerful.
Definitely. And you mentioned one organization and how you were able to bring their purpose out of things that they thought were the way that things should be done. Business on shore, close to customers, et cetera, great talent. How would any organization go about defining that purpose if they have operated and not really collectively sat down and brought that purpose out? Some of the examples that come to mind, or I guess it's more of ignorance and uncertainty and unknowing is, I guess, how is purpose best defined in an organization? Because a lot of people would think, look at Elon Musk, what have you. Okay, well, my purpose is to make sure that life is multiplanetary. And, I've heard, for example, that with X, when he took over X.com or Twitter at the time, he came in and the first thing he did was they assembled a meeting with every employee. And I believe they said he talked for 2 hours straight just about that. And so there was a lot of people there in the organization that were like, why the hell are we talking about this? This is so stupid. We're a social media company. And that was exactly how he knew who needed to go.
Yeah.
for that, like, so that's an example that I have. But how, and it's an extreme one, of course, but how is purpose best defined in an organization? Is it something that is collectively informed? Is it individually informed? Or what are the most successful approach to that?
It's a great question and a great example too, because as I've read the latest biography by Walter Isaacson on Musk, and people might not know that Isaacson basically lived with Musk for 2 years,
Wow.
doing that biography, and that Elon did not have the rights or opportunity to review any of it before it was published.
I
So
should read that one. That's
you get some really amazing stories out of there, but he basically has bludgeoned his way through a lot of the things that as manufacturing we have been learning, and it's like, oh, could have helped him with that one. But he's coming to those same pieces of truth. In fact, even in they build Teslas at the site in Northern California where NUMMI was established. That was a Toyota General Motors partnership, and there were NUMMI guys who were working at Tesla, but he wasn't quite at the point where he could listen to some of their ideas at the time. But so, how does an organization find their purpose or be able to arrive at their purpose? Um, uh, it is definitely a leadership question, and there are several ways that we go about it. And depending on the organization and where they are in that level of identity, uh, there are times when we'll use that purpose to help clarify what it is. An example, the French fry factory that I worked at, that was the Heinz part. It was Ore-Ida French fries, right? We did 2.4 million pounds every 24 hours,
mm,
7 days a week, 300 plus days a year. Um, Large, frozen French fry kind of stuff. And so when you talk about what's the purpose here, um, it's like, well, French fries aren't really the healthiest food, so we're not out to make people healthy. And what is our purpose? And finally, somebody in the leadership team, we met on it several times, big discussions, lots of, what is really our purpose and how do we gel on that? And then the engineering manager said, well, French fries are America's number one comfort food. And so we started talking about, is our purpose to provide comfort? And if you are focusing, which we did, we said, okay, let's use that. Let's try and see if we can, rally around that. But if you're providing comfort, the packaging's got to be right. It's got to be easy to open, easy to. It can't be frozen into a solid ball so that you can't cook it without thawing first. It needs to be available on the shelf. Needs to be properly positioned. Needs to have the right price, because I'm not providing comfort in American homes when times are stressed and people are working multiple jobs and trying to do something good and nutritious for their kids, want to put some fries in the oven, cook them up along with something else. We want to be part of that, providing comfort. And so that became the way of linking that purpose with business attributes that then cascaded down through the organization to where even you had maintenance people that would turn over their PM uh, activities. If I was doing a packaging machine and I finished all my PM activities, I'm turning it back to the operator. And I watched a maintenance. Previously, these guys had battled terribly. My machine would work better if you'd fix it. Well, your machine wouldn't need fixing if you would run it the right way. These people had battled for years, two different unions actually, uh, and yet I watched them after we had a lot of this starting to mature in the organization. And I watched one of the maintenance guys. He turned to the operator and he said, "Are you comfortable with the actions I've taken on your machine?" And she said, "Absolutely, thank you so much." And it was like, oh my gosh, I just saw the miracle happen where these two guys are getting along. But it's that, and I illustrate that just so you can see the cascade. But up front, we start out with some of those questions and some focus groups. What makes you proud to work here? Uh, in some of the larger organizations, we have suggested that they use that same as a survey and then use Google Analytics for the words to come back with. If everybody tells a story, what are the key themes out of those stories? And so you get some things like the company that was Build a Better World. One of the stories that came back from one of the miners, um, he said, I have an adult son who's handicapped. He will always live with me. And he said, my way of building a better world, he says, it's important that I do everything I can at work to build a better world for my son at home, where he has health care that he needs, where he's able to have, the things to help him mentally and physically. And, he talked about that connection, which for him then says, I got to be good at work if I'm going to be good at, have the resources I need at home. And that connection went right through to how do we build a better world. Um, and the focus of the organization even has changed from being just miners of everything and what was available to saying, how do we focus on what's renewable? How do we really make our mining company one of the leaders in renewable energy sources, and focus our future and growth that way? So great things happening, and it shapes your vision and your strategy as well.
Hmm. One of the main things I get from that, which I've never heard anywhere else, is meaning translation. And so here's what I mean is that you define purpose. If you go to the average person who's working on one of those machines and you say, hey, our purpose is to make people comfortable. Have a good day. Okay. They go out and they're like, okay, why? Like, what does that mean? I'm here. I'm
I'll go sit in the
climbing
break
up.
room then. Yeah, I don't want to be at my machine. I'll go sit in the
Yeah.
break room and be comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Right. What about me? Yeah, it's a good one. It's like, okay, how does that translate to me as the machine operator? Well, it's like many organizations and many people try to go about introducing purpose in that way. They call a big meeting and they say, okay, guys, we figured it out. Here's our purpose. And they want everybody to just stand up and clap and be like, yes, I got this.
Yeah, rah meeting.
Yes. But the reality is that if you really want people to understand and internalize and adopt it, you have to go through meaning translation, which is what you said, where, okay, here is our purpose is to create comfort. Number one, comfort food in the United States. Well, that means the product has to meet these 4 or 5 specifications. And so if we go and we now talk to that same line person, we can say, hey, because our purpose is to do this, here's why what you're doing is so important to contribute to that. And this is exactly how you can perform your job to contribute to this purpose. You've now made it personal. That person goes, oh, of course, I'm more than happy to do it in this specific way, because now you've given them the purpose instead of just kind of like forcing it upon them, right? And then they can take meaning to it. They can see how they're contributing to it. And, that builds that organization that you're talking about, where that other person, when they say, let's say you go, define those 4 or 5 product criteria, that could potentially be why, from one person to the next, say, hey, I know why your job is important. Your job is to make the product like this. And so if I'm going to help out with your machine, I know I'm just helping, I'm helping myself do my work better as well.
Yeah, yeah, it really does. It makes that very, very relatable, and that those attributes of how do I really, the storytelling that fits into some of those scenarios too, like if I've got packaging and the printing is not coming out exactly right, so when I scan it, think about, here's the mother trying to buy the stuff, or the father, you've got the kids in tow trying to get this freaking package won't scan across the, you know that's stressful, and they can relate to that. They understand that, you're right, I've got to make sure the seal comes right, I've got to make sure the image is right, very legible, we want it to scan easy. you know um, it becomes very actionable. The other piece that you mentioned that's really cool, purpose is how we serve others, not ourselves, right? And so every time we're thinking about how do we serve others in that, because honestly, you'll do more uh, for other people than you will for yourself. You'll reach a saturation point on your own scale, which sometimes you'll go the extra mile for other people. It's just it's one of those human qualities that we all have. And organizations have that way to tap in to what would it take to make this perfect. What if this never, one of my great examples from the past is a company that build airbags. I want perfection. I want to save lives every time. And to the point where in one of their lines, we were in a few years ago, and they had like 14 million units produced the previous year, and out of those 14 million, they had like 6 that were potential failures, not actual failures, potential failures. And they wanted to know, they wanted help in trying to figure out, how do we get further up into our processes so that we can determine the attributes that would contribute to that potential failure before it actually fails. They wanted to move upstream and see what those indications were. And that's the level of perfection we're after. That's where purpose drives people to do things that are just nuts on a positive scale.
Mhm.
Just cool stuff.
And that even enlightens, by the way, as well, because a question one could ask is, well, how do we define? You mentioned leader standard behavior, and there's definitely things there, principles that likely apply across a broad spectrum of industries and applications and company types. But if we really get down into, as a leader, how you would define what that behavior looks like within your organization, or the things that you're going to do or not do, defining purpose really does bring out that in its clearest form. If you're able to go through that meaning translation process, and even as you added there, thinking through every aspect of the customer journey. So for example, or that user experience, or the prospect experience, because what comes to my mind is that with my company Wealthier, and we're going to talk about the Myers-Briggs thing in a second. It's going to connect here.
Okay.
With my company Wealthier, yeah, we were defining our purpose, and cybersecurity organization focused on finance. And as part of that, it's, well, our purpose is to keep enterprises safe from risks, which even goes further than that. We're protecting banks. I mean, we're protecting people's money, people's peace of mind. And, why, to get very specific here about why this is important is, if we just say that and we don't really take that next step and say, well, what does that mean for the customer? What does that mean in our product and our offerings and our services? Then it's just great. Our purpose is to make people safer. Okay.
It's a thing on the wall.
Yeah.
Sometimes they know it, but if they're not by the wall, they have a hard time remembering it when it's that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. And so if I think through what you're talking about, okay, our packaging needs to be in this certain way that it's very easily scannable, it's quick, it's comfort, right? And if I think through our sales process, what should our sales process be like? If we're working with top executives in major consumer-facing organizations that are dealing with sensitive issues that could be their jobs, could be their company's reputations on the line, if cybersecurity events impact their customers and data gets stolen, things like that, that informs the way we should communicate. And that we also should, it's not like we should avoid sensitive subjects, actually to the opposite, because the standard way of thinking is, well, maybe we should avoid some of those sensitive subjects, just right, people, self-security and things like that. But in reality, if you want to be able to confront those difficult issues, you have to be willing to kind of push a little deeper respectfully and say, well, here's actually what this can mean, and how can we make sure that we get these things, that we get your organization secure, that we make sure these things don't happen, because your customer could be in a state of fear, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, if this goes wrong, I lose my job, or somebody gets hurt, or things like that. It's so what I'm really getting at is that when you define a purpose and you translate that into the meaning in the life of the customer, you have a very clear rule book versus just, hey, let's go out and kind of see what works, let's see what happens, and try things. It's a more comprehensive way of
and it needs to be translated into those business attributes and strategic initiatives where we line those kinds of things up. A lot of that emphasis. I had something I was going right there. Guy, you have to edit that part out.
Well, we will.
Guess I lost it. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Old guy moment.
Take your time. We can edit in and out anything and everything.
It'll come back to me.
Sure. Okay. Meaning translation, getting it down into the life of the customer. Maybe that was where you were going with that.
Yeah.
Purpose clearly defining.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's illustrating on the positive when we do it right. Right. It's having the storytelling that happens at each layer of the organization. Going back to the airbag company that used to do this so well, they would put an automobile in the lobby at the entrance to the manufacturing facility that would be just totally crashed, just just destroyed, and a little placard out front that says, "This family, here's what happened, here's the date, here's the result, and basically that these people survived this accident because of our products. Here's the products we produce, products that were involved, function perfectly." And that way, people have got something they can take back into their work areas and say, that was ours. That's why, we need to be doing the things that we do. Um, and it makes it real. In a lot of the other organizations, we'll suggest that in each of their huddles, if they have a daily huddle or a weekly huddle, depending on what, whether they're functions or operations or whatever, we'll suggest that not only do they maybe have a safety moment and, they've got time to review their KPIs and things they're working on, but they also have a purpose moment. Where did that purpose happen? And it's a little tricky to get it started. People aren't used to really connecting that. And so it's leader led at the first, but once that connects and people start, you start to hear magical moments that are happening all through the organization, and then we connect their corporate communications groups so that we have a landing zone for all of those special moments to happen, so that they can share them across the organization, and people start to really get some detailed color about what it looks like to fulfill purpose at different layers in the organization.
Right.
It's yeah, lots of magic there.
From the strategic all the way down to go back to that story, the frontline worker.
Yeah, or the janitor, right? I mean, where they're having a purpose moment where they're improving life because of this, or where they're creating comfort because of that. You know, um, it's we bring out the best in people when that
Hmm.
happens.
And so to go back to the Myers Briggs aspect there, when you mentioned that your dad was an entrepreneur and that your leadership style was very direct, made me think of myself. So I'm young, I'm still 29,
Yeah.
and ENTJ.
Uh,
So I was very, when you were saying those things, I was like, yeah, I get that feedback sometimes. Very direct
yeah.
in the way I do things. And would you say that the Shingo aspect, because I think a conception that I have of Japanese culture, in essence, if you look at some of the really great companies, they do operate with such deep sense of purpose that the hearts and minds, the emotions are brought up more, or I guess you can inform and really shed some light on that, because you said you went from being an INTJ all the way to now an INFJ.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that. And yeah, I think
The
it's
Japanese,
hard to change. It's hard to change, but obviously sometimes it can be fruitful.
it is hard to change, and I think my engineering background too always moved me more into tooling and equipment and design, and how we do certain things. The people aspect was not something I ever planned on spending time engaged with from a business management aspect. um, and the cultures, I get that question a lot. um, the thing that we miss in our culture and Western cultures, cultures outside of Asia, high respect for positions and authority, and very, very humble and very um, introspective, um, very accountable, high levels of stewardship, um, not as much questioning, but very accepting of, if the leader says this, we are moving in those directions, and we're very committed and very loyal to that. It's a little bit, different in different cultures. Uh, in the West and in Western type cultures, there are a lot more people who will question what you're doing. I mean, when I did some work in Vietnam before the end of the week, I mean, they were just sponges. They would collect everything that I'd taught them. By the end of the week, they had it all translated into Vietnamese, and it was like, they just absorbed and adopted. And in Western cultures, it's like you're trying to sell it to try and get them to believe it, to try and get them
Hmm.
to do it. So there's that aspect. And in fact, I've been taking tours to Japan for many years, Um, and the reason that a lot of Japanese organizations don't mind hosting Western cultures is because they really don't believe that Western leaders will be humble enough to be able to accept some of the things that they know make them successful. We can show you, but you won't ever be able to do it, kind of thing. So,
Mhm.
um, you know, there is that aspect. And yet, with organizations that are doing really well, it seems like they form an island in whatever culture they're in. Almost that you talked about before, regardless of what the country culture might be and things that are happening inside the country that might be, political disruption, either they're very liberal or very conservative or, any of that kind of stuff. These organizations become islands within that. So yeah, all of that stuff is happening in the world when we come to work. I have my sense of meaning. I have my sense of belonging. I have my purpose. I am very effective, and you hear people say things like, um, it's weird because you see it in lots of different organizations. They'll say something like, "I feel like my life has been structured to be where I am, doing what I'm doing."
Hmm.
And when you start to hear that in different countries and different organizations, different industries, and you realize that their individual purpose is now connected with the organization's purpose, and that harmony between the two is creating, massive belonging and just the incredible stuff we all want for. And those places, right? They have waiting lists of people who want to work there. They can be selective with the talent they bring in. They have, incredible draw and magnetism for the right kind of talent. Um, it's cool stuff.
Right. And so some of the things I've heard to kind of expand on what you're talking about there is
Yeah.
in the United States, we have much more of a driven sense of rugged individualism and, the individual as the highest ideal and, the thing that matters most. And, in Asian cultures, there's the subjection of the self to, the collective, there's the respect, the bowing and other things like that, in the Japanese culture specifically. And I think what you started to touch on there is that the real thing we should be after is a flourishing culture, no matter where you are, because there are principles and common themes of flourishing cultures in general. And so that can be aspects of Western culture, it's aspects of Asian culture, but organizationally, when we go back to building businesses, there is a framework for building flourishing organizations, and that really should be the goal, not complete loyalty to this is the way it should be done only, but here, as you mentioned earlier, what are we going to do this month, and what did we learn from last month, and how can we create the best process within this organization while also having the right culture where everyone feels to go right off one of your points is it's almost like when we talk about political uncertainty or anything that could cause instability or tension within an organization, the best organizations create environments where those things cease to matter while people are there. Not entirely. It's not like they just fall away to oblivion and nothingness, but they build organizations where people don't have to feel pressured or worry about those things, and people can really just focus on the best output for the
Yeah. Yeah.
group.
Exactly. And it's amazing too. I mean, I've seen those cultures in India and Asia and Europe, and South America is another great culture where, incredible things are starting to happen. Um, but where they can build those and actually learn from each other, um, because of the slight variations in how they'll approach it, and to allow them some autonomy. So you define the system, and it's important to learn what things we hold to very closely and very tightly, and then which things as a leadership team, management team, we let be entrepreneurial. Let them have some variation because we're going to learn from that. One of my favorite books from a few years ago is the book called Anti-Fragile, by Nassim Taleb. I'm not sure if I'm
Yep,
pronouncing
Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Yep.
it. Yep. I love the book. I understand parts of it. I have had to go through it several times because it's very deep for me. But the thing I love the most is that he talks about organizations not needing. I mean, being robust means I'm resistant to influence from the outside. I'm resistant to change, and I can endure not changing, even though the outside conditions may change. At least this is my take from it. Being resilient means that it may deform me a little bit and we may change the way that we operate, but eventually I'll snap back to what it is. Being anti fragile means that I learn from the variation and actually allow the variation to make us better every time. And that to me is the essence of what we're talking about. If that's the purpose, we've got a continuous improvement system. Every variation that we experience away from the norm, we start looking at, and it becomes that opportunity to make us even stronger and even better than before. And so lots of pieces of truth, I think, from various sources that come together in this kind of approach.
Hmm. And what about to talk more of your present day work and some of the businesses that you've helped run through? You recently just helped some mining companies win the Shingo Award. Talk about what was really required for that to come to light from where they started to where they were finally received that prize.
It's quite a story because the first day that we showed up there, um, just while I was working with McKinsey, and I've been working with this client now for about 8 years. But um, the first day on site, they actually had a list at security of people who were not allowed to be on site, and they had highlighted all the McKinsey people, but they didn't know me. It was my first day, so I was the only one admitted on the site. But the particular leader in charge of that group had a bad experience, and so he you know it took us like 4 hours to get through security on that day. Um, that was the beginning of the association with him. Uh, 4 years later, um, he, he had gotten the vision. Their folks were up for Shingo. They'd done, they had done, they had done things, and we should talk about aspiration too, because that was key in their learning and progress. But in one particular part of the mining is copper, and so the cathode area is where it's an activity where you use electrolysis and chemicals to be able to pull copper out of solution and then be able to, solidify it uh, so that you can send it out to be processed. But um, nobody wanted to work there. It is a high chemicals, high, heavy weights, full suits on with fresh air masks and just all of the very difficult areas to work. Dirty, grungy, nasty area. Um, almost 4 years later, they had completely transformed that, and people were just, you know, on on fire. As an example, we asked them to set some aspirations. And when we say aspirations, they've got purpose in place. We've talked about systems, all that kind of stuff. When you start setting goals, sometimes the worst thing we can do as a leader is to set a wimpy goal. If I ask the organization to improve 2% or 6%, with the best of intentions, as a leader, I don't want to stress the organization too much. But if I set a wimpy goal, here's what happens. They look at their existing practices and they kind of in their mind, they create this mental image of, I can do this better, I can tighten that more. And they start tightening up and cinching down on the existing process, and they say, I can do that. I can hit that 3%, or I can hit the 6% by the end of the year, and we'll have it. It's exactly the opposite of what we want to do. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to set a goal that's aspirational enough that people look at it in the organization and they say, there's no way that we can do that. And as a leader, then your answer is, you're right. There is no way we can do that the way we do it now. I'm not asking you to work harder. I'm not asking you to work faster. I don't want the sweatshop mentality. What I want is a process that is different than the way we're doing it now. And in this particular cathode organization, they set this aspiration for how much copper they would recover. And it was well beyond the technical limits of the equipment that they had. They had lots of engineering data that said that that's not possible. You cannot recover that amount of copper from this much tonnage that's going through. It's just not. You'll never hit that. In fact, the maintenance manager there came back to me, um, right before they applied for Shingo, and he says, I never believed in any of this. culture kind of stuff and performance kind of stuff. He says, I always knew that if you wanted to get more production out, you need better technology, you need new equipment, you need to buy more stuff. And so um, he said, we set this aspirational goal. And he's telling me the story. We set this aspirational goal that we knew we couldn't hit. And then he said 3 months later, we hit it. And he said, I still don't understand how we did that because it's beyond the limits that we could, prove was not possible. And he said, so we set a new goal that was even further than that. And he says, I'm confident we're going to hit that one. And he says, what I want to know is how come I didn't learn this 30 years ago? And then we talked about how it's not the absence of technology, but it's taking everything that the people knew about the process and the ways that they could manage the process and understand what those triggers are for getting maximum outputs and maximum quality, and then adding the technology to that experience. And the collaboration between technology and people then becomes the most powerful element of all. And for the last 2 years, that particular group on their strategic planning activities, management gives them a target. In the last 2 years, they've come back to management and said, that's not high enough. We can do more. Whether you win a Shingo Prize or not, that's the kind of organization we're after. I don't care if people win a Shingo Prize. It doesn't matter to me, right? I want them to have that environment. I want them to have that level of power in their organizations and the kind of realization of how good they can be. That's what we're after. That's the real prize. You get recognized for it or not, it's a whole nother issue. But and there are problems with if you get recognized with a Shingo award, a Shingo Prize, that can be a problem. Because thousands of people come to visit you and they all tell you how wonderful you are, and there's a danger that you might believe it. And so there is a kind of plateauing effect. So I always tell clients, if you win it once, here's the deal, you've got to win it again 5 years from now, which means you've got to be that much better than you were before. And that pretty well sets the pattern for a couple of decades, if you can do that. So.
Right. And if you think about what you're saying there, what's required to win one of those, and if people are going to spend so much of their time at work, then that level of engagement, involvement, contribution, problem solving, iteration, is that the environment, as you're mentioning, is what you want to give people in their 8 to 12 or whatever that amount of time is they're going to be at work. You want them to feel excited instead of just, I'm going to go show up and I'm going to put this hazmat level suit on and I'm going to make sure that the copper is ready for the next step in the process. And that's it. Versus, if you give them aspiration, which enlightens and brings out the best in people, they're going to go home and they're going to be thinking about that. They're going to be excited to share and think about the ways that they can improve that process or be a greater contributor, which is just, in my experience, and maybe in yours and many others as well, is that level of engagement and aspiration, as you put, is what life is about.
Yeah.
In many respects.
It's the part where, again, you hear these common things from site to site, different countries and everything, where people go, I'm just really glad they pay me to come because I can probably do this for free because I love it so much. They have that level of just, and things at work then in those environments, things at work actually benefit things at home. Work becomes a supportive environment. There's, especially in mining and oil and gas and a lot of these process industries, the lifestyle is difficult. You do fly in, fly out kind of stuff. You're gone for a couple of weeks at a time. It can be a challenge. But when things at work start to also benefit your home life, and they're supportive in, we learn problem solving, learn, communication skills and purpose and all of that kind of stuff, we are making life better, for all of those people. So.
Definitely. And for me, from this interview, what I've learned is this is the exact, I used the word antidote earlier. This is for sure an antidote for me, and just some things that, I've been experiencing, like I said, high driving ENTJ, and only focused on results, focused on numbers, focused on output and all that, versus, I'm excited to go and start thinking about how I can create supportive environments and what the purpose of the organizations that I lead are, and how, to bring that positivity and purpose to more people. So question I have, go ahead.
And when we get all of those right results, when all of the KPIs are in place, being able to tell the story of, because these are here, here's the good that we do as an organization, here's the benefit, and even to illustrate that with specific examples and stories, then causes us as leaders to think more about what is really value added for the customer. What is it that we do, and what is the good? And so strategically it becomes more aware. And when the organization is running that, very high effectively, moving things forward, then you have time to think about that kind of stuff. You have time to think about the future and look at how we better serve clients. So.
Right. And results change up and down, maybe just up. Maybe you have a good improving organization, your results continuously improve, and you scale the level of your work. But results change. So if you're constantly identified with, here are the results today, whenever that goes down, your organization's going to lose morale. People will be upset. People will feel like they don't matter. They're not contributing. Things aren't working. Versus environments endure. And if you build the identity of the organization around the quality of that environment, that's something that people will want to come back to no matter what. Yeah. And when things do go down, they feel a sense of collectiveness and responsibility and purpose within contributing and making sure it goes great. And when it goes great, well, maybe like you said, maybe they have to remind themselves that, hey, this too can pass. So let's make sure that we.
Yeah, things always change, and so the environment has to be there. Markets change, technology changes, but having that group of collaborative, committed folks that makes life good and makes business amazing. So many of these organizations have just completely captured their markets. That it's interesting, the balance. They've captured their markets and actually put competitors out of business, while doing it in a very happy way. I mean, they're happy inside their organizations, very joyful places to work, but they're putting competitors out of business because they can't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary. It's scary.
And we scary good. We talked about you talked about aspiration. What are your aspirations as you look forward on what's next?
You're talking individually or as an organization?
Both.
So individually, right? It's taken me, I've been doing this since the mid-'80s. I don't want the next generation of leaders to have to start learning that all over. So personally, I thought about when I left McKinsey, started finishing my decade with McKinsey, it was like, yeah, I could retire. I could be, this could be a transition point. I could spend a lot more days snow skiing every year, which would be great with me. I'm kind of a snow skiing addict. Love time in the mountains, but I don't want leaders to have to start learning this over again. I want to take the things that have been given to me, shared with me, and make sure that the next generation of leaders have those things in place so they can continue to advance on it. Back in the day, I was fortunate to spend time with some really great people. Ralph Steyer from Johnsonville Foods was a phenomenal mentor and teacher, and some of the other folks. I loved the Tom Peters series, In Search of Excellence, back then. Never been updated, and I'm still working on some things there. But there are some great people. We just want to make sure that makes it into the next generation. From an ICG standpoint, ICG Consulting, trying to develop some of those. I've got some McKinsey colleagues that are working with me there, and some others. We're trying to make sure that we're able to help build goodness in organizations. And I know that sounds weird, but some of our clients now range from, we've got the mining kind of stuff and traditional manufacturers and avionics, but we also have municipal cities where we're looking at cities and saying, how do I make this work better for the people that live there? How does the snow removal and event management and the way that we do permitting and build commerce areas, how do we make all of those things better? And we're finding some amazing successes in those areas and some great stories that are coming. So
Outstanding.
One of the first things we do, and I should mention this, one of the first things we do is we tell people, if you have an interest in this kind of stuff, come with us and see some of these organizations. Um, I use the chocolate cake analogy, right? I can tell you what chocolate cake looks like, tastes like, smells like. I can say it's rich and it's smooth and it's creamy, and I can describe all of that, but it's not the same as tasting it. It's not the same as tasting a great piece of chocolate cake. And so we take people to some of these organizations, and we recommend at least 2 or 3 that you get a chance to see, because you get a very similar flavor, even though they do it a little bit different at each one. And then we say, if that's the kind of thing you want in your organization, then this is the place to start. And we start to set aspirations off of, these are places that had their previous lead time was 28 days and now it's 20 minutes. Those kinds of things that they've accomplished that are just phenomenal, with cultures off the chart. But then we start saying, okay, let's develop some of those spots inside of your corporation, and then give your people that experience, because it's usually one of those career altering moments where leaders go, yeah, I knew all the words, I didn't understand that that's what it meant. They get that kind of aha light bulb moment where it's like, oh my gosh. For some, it's a little discouraging, because it's like, I'm so far away from that. And then we help them to remember, everybody at some point was that far away. The 5 years from now, you'll either be at this, more advanced spot, or you won't. So let's get going.
And what can listeners do to make sure, what's the one action that they can take right now after listening to this to make sure that they're on the best possible path for that next 5 years to be a outstanding chocolate cake, not just your average packaged good from a gas station? It's world class.
So the best thing is come and see, right? Come and see what we're doing. Come and see those organizations. But even if you can't come and see, think about the good that you do. Think about what business attributes harmonize to that. Focus on that, because then you can answer the why. Why should I change? Why should I care about what you're telling me? Why should I improve? Why does it matter? As a leader, if I can answer those kinds of things, and then also set that aspiration that causes people to think bigger than where they are, then amazing things happen. So it's easy to say. It's so hard to do. It's probably one of the hardest things you can do professionally, is to get an organization to move in that way. But it's so worth it. It makes all of the travel and all of the nights in hotels, and to see an organization do that. And as much as people love going to see these amazing places, it's even better when it's yours, and you're able to realize that we can help other people do that. So it's cool stuff, fun stuff.
Excellent. Well, Ted, thank you for being on the show. We'll make sure to drop and share some links, and to support those aspirations that you have. It's my responsibility and my team's responsibility to make sure that this episode reaches as many people as possible. So we'll be sharing a ton of stuff about this episode, and look forward to getting it to as many people as possible, so we can make sure the next generation of leaders like myself, you've already impacted me today. I, again, am very excited to go and apply these things to my life.
Very
so
cool.
Thank you.
I've loved talking with you, and love your questions. Great insight.
Well, for everybody listening, make sure to take that next action step, and like, subscribe, and share this content so we can reach more people. Thank you all for watching. We'll catch you in the next episode.